Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, the live video podcast for people like myself, my co-host, and you. Get a deeper conversation about the films we watch today. And we've got another show I'm really excited about a movie that I love to, in a way, rail against, even though it's not like it did anything, never offended me, didn't steal an old girlfriend or anything. And yet I have strong feelings about it. So let's get into it. That's right, everybody. We're going to be talking about the 2010 hit, The King's Speech. And more importantly, why, at least in my opinion, no one talks about this movie anymore. Of course, until today. Anyway, I want to welcome my co-host with the most, the man, the myth, the legend. Let's give him a big round of applause. Mr. Jim Chaboyko. Jim, how you doing, my friend?
Good. I was going to make a big joke about not having my vocal coach here, but I thought that would be in bad taste, so I decided to skip the whole stammering thing. But I don't think that would have been well received. So,
all right, Jim. We got some folks in the chat. We got a couple of folks watching already. We do have a great friend of the show, Mr. Dragon Movie Guy. Let's give him a. You know what? Dare we, Jim? Dare we give him an air horn?
Oh, yeah. That's what is there for?
Even though who got bunted out of the Stanley Cup run
today? The Golden Knights are also on the golf course with the Jets and the Maple Leafs. So, yeah. Misery all around.
I believe, what did he say in the chat here, Jim? I see our teams are now both done with the cup for this season. Time to focus on movies. You're absolutely right. Thanks for that focus, Dragon Movie Guy. And I'll take over with your permission, Jim. I'll take over from here.
Good.
The King's Speech. This flick came out in 2010 and just demolished, dare I say it, Jim, it was also the king of the 2011 award season. It 185 nominations, 70 awards, but I would argue that no one talks about this movie anymore. But before we get into that, and a number of reasons why, but before we get into that, why don't we do a quick, one-line review, a quick see it or skip it. Jim, is The King's Speech a see it or a skip it?
Yeah, it's for me, I know you have a hate on for this one. I watched it last night and I liked it more than I remembered. I liked it more than I did before. So I'd say see it. Yeah, I think it's quite effective. There's a few reasons that we're talking about this tonight, and I think I've got a few lined up, but yeah, I think that it's a kind of.
I like your take, Jim. Yeah. I think that I liked it better than I thought that I remembered it. Is fine,
and not just to bug you or anything like that. That's not a. I'm not trolling you.
You're misunderstanding me. I'm not saying that I got a mean on Ford as a film.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's almost about how we talk about film.
Yes. Yeah.
But that is not the heart of what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a see it as well. It's a perfectly fine film. It's really well made. The characters are well crafted. It does, how you would put it, a great trick. It gets us to sympathize with the poor, picked upon, rich, and inherited of status, inherited royalty, the rich white guy, which is quite the trick. Yeah, so it's a see it for me as well. A see it with an asterisk, not the same as I have for other movies, but it's still a fine film, heartwarming. It's fine. But then I guess that really means we now get right into the meat of it. Let's, you know what, Jim? I did not intend to do that. What I intended to do is say it's time to jump into the spoiler zone. And started off with, am I asking the right question? Is it something that we have pretty much forgotten about it? Or is it that we just don't talk about it? Or is that the same thing? What's your take on that?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this since you proposed this particular thesis. Yeah, I'd say it's the same thing. Basically, we're sort of attempting to measure something that's not particularly measurable, and it's the sort of the impact of this piece of pop culture in the general firmament. But and that's always sort of a hard thing to grasp. But basically, does it even come up? Oh, quickly. There's a really weird conversation on Twitter, or there has been the last 2 weeks. Is Coda the worst best picture? I don't know. I didn't bring it to your attention. Yeah. And there's quite a lot. Well, I've seen 96 of or 94 of the 96. It's like, I can't imagine half these guys rushing out to get a copy of Wings. But anyway, so they say, oh, this is somewhere in the middle, not even close. Oh, what's the circus one that they featured in the Spielberg movie? Greatest Show on Earth. Oh,
yes.
They said the Greatest Show on Earth is far worse, and the crash is horrible, and everyone with these sometimes are interesting takes. This didn't even come up in the mentions, so I guess it's firmly in the middle there. But wasn't even mentioned.
I got two items for you. One, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I'll throw you some links.
And I am not. That would be interesting because there is another film I would argue that nobody talks about Coda anymore. Well, and I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a bad way for either of these films. It's not a knock, or maybe it's a knock, but it's not like nobody talks about it, therefore it's bad. It's more. Nobody talks about it because maybe there's just not a lot to talk about.
We loved that one. Just if people don't remember, we loved that one at the time. Like we were
I want to revisit it, but then I'm like, well, I'm just going to cry again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's mostly the reason I kind of put this question out there is I'm like, nobody cares about the King's Speech anymore, and it's my criticism of the award shows in general. It really is the heart. When I knock the King's Speech, it's not that I'm knocking that film and Tom Hooper as a filmmaker. You know, he's made your films that are far better to knock him and did his work. You know, Cats, anyone.
Are you? Yeah.
That said, yeah, it's mostly about this idea that, it's on this pedestal, it is therefore this great thing, and I'm like, oh, much like the King's Speech that nobody talks about anymore. And Jim, that is measurable. Let us, let's go to the digital. You gotta love the internet. And you gotta love, where are we here? There we are.
Oh.
Google Trends.
Oh, there we go.
So this is the interest over time over the last 5 years. And there were a couple times when it's just compared to itself, basically. It's like, there are a couple of times where it received a 100, and that's Google's way of saying peak interest. And that was in the last 5 years. Of course, this movie's 14, 15 years old. But if you look at it, it's right around when the Queen died. And it's one of those things. And then a year later, or a few months later, I should say, of course, when the Queen, when we'd start thinking about the Queen's Christmas speech, the Christmas address. And then any of these other times, I am willing to bet that is also when King Charles was doing his speech from the throne, the King's Speech. And so, and then people, oh yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a while. Because here's the thing, that year, if we're just, Jim, talking about nominees, we've got Black Swan, The Fighter, Inception, The Kids Are All Right, 127 Hours, The Social Network, Toy Story 3, True Grit, and Winter's Bone. Half of those movies are talked about a lot more, even now. And we just have to go to, here's the comparison to the King's Speech and Inception.
Yeah.
Now the small blue line, that would be the King's Speech. And if we look at it, that's just the past 5 years. If we go back to 2004, which is when they started tracking this stuff, of course, it's nothing until, like, you can even see some bumps where people were like, oh, Christopher Nolan's making another movie. But it is hilarious how fundamentally different. I did some math comparing a number of them, Jim, and it's 6-1. Inception versus, and even if you talk about The Social Network, that's 3 times the interest over time that the King's Speech has generated. So I'm not totally pulling this out of my, I'm not totally pulling this out of my ass. It just does not generate the interest since it came out. And I think that is an interesting question because, I agree with you. It's a pretty good flick. It's a well-told story. And for what's really a play, a filmed play, I think Hooper did a great job of maintaining our interest, and it's only when I was researching for tonight that I'm like, oh, I really did kind of push the envelope as far as cinematography and set and setting and everything to kind of make us feel a part of the action, action. you could almost put air quotes on it.
Gotcha.
It's still just about a couple of guys talking, you know. And so I think that's the question I'm now thinking. It's like, yeah, I would you agree with me? No one talks about this movie, and no one, a little hyperbole, but you know.
Well, I'm glad you have figures behind it, or a measurable way of taking a look at that, because mine is does it get mentioned in stand-up routines or on SNL? that's basically my
Bet you there's a metric. I bet you we can.
Oh yeah,
we can
yeah.
find.
Well, they just did a Forrest Gump. You know, it used to be that you had to be timely with comedy.
Yeah.
They had a full-on Forrest Gump sketch in the Shane Gillis episode earlier this year, so I guess the timeliness for comedy is out the window. But
well, I think some comedy is timely, some isn't. Like it's. I think my hyperbole is legitimate. The rule that comedy is always bound to its time is like, well, what kind of comedy? I recently rewatched Forrest Gump. It's interesting you mentioned that. Still gets me choked up at the end. And another one I just recently watched was When Harry Met Sally. In a way, the rom-com that should destroy all other rom-coms. You know, it's one of those ones where it's like, that may end up, Jim, on is this a damn near perfect movie?
Yeah.
You know, it's that effing good. And yeah, you can tell it's like, oh, this is definitely an late 80s, early 90s comedy style, but it holds up.
Yeah.
Because the heart of these characters, and that, I guess that's one of the things I wanted to ask you, Jim, is to get this conversation rolling is okay, we agree. There's something, this movie is sort of fallen by the wayside. We agree with that. Why do you think, what's your first impression of why you think that is? Why this one hasn't held up in our mind and in pop culture the way some of its other peers of that year? And again, Jim, it's kind of shocking. If we look at the top 50 best movies, I mean, this is IMDb's, kind of ranking sort of deal. And there's other movies on here I forgot all about. Or I shouldn't say I forgot all about. Because they weren't on that Oscar list, it wasn't really top of mind in the context of this conversation. But How to Train Your Dragon came out that year. Kick-Ass, that I refer to regularly. That actually, I think, made a contribution. Of course, Black Swan's referred to a lot. Shutter Island, when people are talking about Martin Scorsese. Scott Pilgrim,
Yeah.
cannot talk about
It's my son's
Edgar
favorite
Wright
movie.
and without talking about Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That one is talked about, right? The Town. I'm not sure that has quite the same weight, but I guess where I'm going with this, Jim, is some of the reason it's not talked about was maybe that was just a really good year. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I've got three main reasons why I think
Throw them down, baby.
About it. But do you want them all at once, or?
Well, you know what? What we're going to do before we get your three reasons?
Sure.
Let's beg everyone in the chat, including our good friend Dragon Movie Guy. Give him another. That man deserves another air horn. But yes, if we could beg everyone for a like, a subscribe, and of course, ringy ding that bell.
I was going to do the bouncing DVD thing, but it didn't quite work.
We'll have to cue that better. So yeah, you know what, Jim? Let's get your three reasons out. Sure. We'll discuss those, and then depending on it, maybe some will mesh, or I'll share what I think is going on here.
Yeah. Okay. So this could be, I think, total BS, but it maybe not the way people look at movies. But here they are. Number one, Not the last 20, 30 years haven't been the best time to be a royal. I don't think the institution's held in such high regard. So I think people aren't as drawn to things about the royal family, especially stuff that's, well, it's critical. And the movie does make the characters not particularly sympathetic. I mean, it's sort of, it's honest in that way. But anyway, so that's one of them. The royal family, that's number one for me. Number two is that it's a Weinstein production, and it's sort of last 6 years of his terror-filled tenure. So if it came out in 2011, he was known as a really
Came out in 2010, but yeah.
2010, yeah. So it would win the awards in 2011, yeah. But I think all his trouble went down in 2016. So that's sort of the last 5 years. He was known as a very obnoxious Oscar campaigner as well. So that
some say he invented the modern Oscar campaign.
Yeah, yeah. It does. There was quite a bit of action even in the 60s. I've got another story about that. But anyway, so that's my second one. My third one is, and again, this may be just totally coming out of my ass, but the death of the death of the Late Show, when TV stations used to play movies at night. This, I agree, I think would be a perfect Late Show movie. One that they would put on maybe once or twice a year.
Wouldn't generate a lot of complaints.
No, and it'd be very Shawshanky, I think. Yeah. And I think, and which is how Shawshank got its cachet, is by being, a couple of the stations of the States would just play it on holidays, play it late at night. And so when you don't have that anymore, when you don't have that sort of passive movie watching experience where you just turn on the TV and it's like, hey, we'll watch whatever's on. I think that this would be a perfect Late Show movie.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really exist in the way it used to anymore.
That's an interesting take, including the Weinstein bit. The only one I would maybe push back a little on, Jim, or probe a bit more, is the royals angle. Mm-hmm. I would say since Princess Di, they have not, their reputation has only, waned. Yeah. And yet, Bridgerton, Downton Abbey, Gosford Park even, The Queen, these big, heartfelt pieces all about humanizing these inbred pervert sexist racists.
They're not going to have you for dinner anymore if you don't watch it.
I think I'm not sure. So I'm not sure. I think we're always kind of fascinated. We all have a certain fascination with, with royalty. But you know what? It could be a contributing factor though, at the same time. Although I would say the choice of their subject matter was maybe one of the reasons. Let's look back at these people that we still look at very positively, especially George VI. You got the basically
wartime,
the fucking nasty, at the abdicator, the the royal Sarah Palin of his time.
Yeah. Yeah, what a charmer.
Played wonderfully by Guy Pearce. Like he dug. Oh, yeah. He looked like he was having fun. But yeah, that would be the only thing I'd push back on. But it is something I'll noodle on, and the Weinstein aspect, and even that Death of the Late Show. Because you're absolutely right. This is a great midnight movie. No, nobody will be calling into the station to complain about it.
Yeah.
For myself, I've kind of, I kind of took a different tack. And for me, Jim, I think it's a lot more to do with, or I felt that one of its big reasons that the King's Speech isn't talked about anymore, it doesn't really have much to say. I mean, if we think about it, it's about this guy overcoming his stammer, to do his job. But inside, it's literally about a man finding his voice. And at that, it's like, okay, we've all been there, and this is, I think, where social expectations have changed. It's one of those things where it's like, I got to admit, it's like, what are you making a movie about? Rich white guy finds his voice, finally. He is able to speak. It's like, that doesn't, and I don't even mean the sort of snarky comedy critique. I'm more thinking it's like, I'm not sure that's really that interesting. Like it's, whereas there's other movies that are taking a different angle. You mentioned Coda earlier, and I'm like, not just about this young woman, also in a way finding her voice. And if, it's got a lot of similarities,
literally.
right?
Yeah.
But it's from a different perspective. It is a young woman in a poor family, on the social, maybe a bit on the social edge. This isn't that. Their problems cannot be solved with a checkbook. They don't have guards. And so I think that alone makes all the stakes higher.
Yeah. And I suspect that's part of why Coda is being dumped on, because it's a young woman as the lead, and it deals with people with a disability.
Jim, you're not saying that there's terrible people on the internet just looking for excuses to
what would I
pick on women. But yeah, I think Coda has more to say just because it does have more to say. It embeds her struggle in a number of struggles. The other thing I would say, and this is where I'm gonna go to Inception here. And yes, and I know another rich white guy. But Nolan has something, maybe something more to say, and he says it more artfully. It's still something that it's still a visually stunning and creative effort. I think Nolan, or let's say, maybe I shouldn't say Christopher Nolan, because it isn't just one person who makes a movie, but I think Nolan made a contribution to film. And that is one of the reasons we still talk about Inception. That is one of the reasons we still talk about a number of these movies that, came out over the last 20 years in the same time, is that they made something, they had more to say, or they made it in a more artful way, something that contributed to the art form, or in the odd special occasion, both. Like something where you can go, hey, let's look at this as an example of an amazing and game-changing way to tell a filmed story. And so that was one of the ones I've made a few cheap shots about the rich white guy. When will
Mhm.
that guy find a voice? When will he be given the mic?
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it was more about, and I guess more where my question was born is, what have these guys, what did Hooper, what did this film contribute to the form? Because I think when we really start talking about these things, we better have a really iconic character that everyone can truly relate with.
Mhm.
And over time, it's like, how do I relate to some royal, you know?
Yeah.
And, or even if it is that character, that you're saying it in such a way that everyone's still going, damn, damn. You watch it and you go, I am watching something that remains special, that it was still, it's a monument to filmmaking, a monument to the art that I can see from 30
Mhm.
years. Whereas everyone else kind of falls below the horizon. Oh, there's still Star Wars peeking up, or
Mhm.
Stagecoach, for crying out loud, or Casablanca. That these things kind of stick up over the horizon because they were such game changers. So that
Mhm.
was kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah. No, that's
Oh,
interesting.
and DMG's got, oh, look at that. DMG. Move that over to a screen
It's
where I
good.
can see it better.
It's good. We want to. Yeah, I just answered as he was talking about my thin air poster here on the
Oh,
side. Oh,
yeah.
it's actually a writing festival I used to work for. So it's, I think Margaret Atwood's name is on that, but it was all the contributing authors. So I think Atwood's on there somewhere as well. But yeah, it's just a little bit of it, and it's covering up a pile of my wife's mail. So it's
He also says people are
cinematic
talking about
magic.
people are talking about the King's Speech 14 years later about as much as hockey fans talk about the golden ... What was that team in Vegas again? Yeah,
That's funny.
but I don't know, Jim. What do you think about that as far as the contributing to the art
Yeah.
aspect of of film and why we remember it? Because I guess in a real way, I'm asking why we remember a movie at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And and this isn't a pushback. I don't
Yeah.
think every film can change the art. If it
No.
did, then we'd have something unrecognizable from the Lumiere brothers to today. We'd be just go, what's that? But um so these things come gradually and in little pieces and things like that. One of my favorite movies is District 9, and that was, a kind of a big mashup. Like, it used sort of reality TV for a little bit, and it became a buddy thing, and then it was a monster movie, and it's all these glorious things together, just mashed together, and it was in a way that I'd never seen before. So that's part of, and I had no idea how it was going to end. So that was part of the reason why I like that movie so much. But um, yeah, so this one I would think that they were sort of more. First of all, it's a historical pick. So that means, of course, that they're changing all the history, and they have to change it in a way that it's
Yeah, but I,
acceptable. But I'm just saying
it's
that
also wasn't their goal. It's not a
yeah,
history lesson.
yeah,
It
and it's
was
not a
a
documentary.
piece of entertainment.
I would say
You
that
know,
their goals in putting forth a movie like this and creating a movie like putting forth creating a movie like this would be to make sort of a coherent historical whole. So what their goals are probably different than Nolan's. They just want to get the thing done and have it resemble some sort of history. You know, trying to they're trying to have it best of both ways, right? They're trying to have the drama and the historical bit. Those don't always match up, right?
yeah.
So there you have the creation of my favorite thing, composite characters, which is pretty crazy. Anyway, but yeah, so I would say that their goals were probably different. And again, I'm not defending them or I get it, but Yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about, though. Like,
Yeah,
I think this is very
but
concerned with
goals
the
or
telling of
not,
the
that's
story.
not what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Who cares about
No,
their goals?
but
It's why do
I'm
we
saying that it would have
remember a
affected how they
movie?
told the story.
Yeah. But that's, I guess that's yeah, it's they did exactly what this story would allow them to do.
Yeah.
And because what they wanted to do is tell a feel-good story about a man finding his voice.
Mhm.
Full stop. Anything else would be like weird gilding. It's like, why are we in space? Why are there's all these weird dreams, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
This isn't the bell jar,
Hmm.
you know, which because of that individual's, you know, terrible circumstances lended itself to a more artful, you know, an artful kind of filmmaking.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that necessarily Nolan every time it's like, how will I change film again?
You know, I think with Nolan, though, he wants to go and he wants to blow people's minds. I think that's sort of what his approach are. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really going to show him this time. You know, he's sort of like James Cameron or,
no,
or
why
one
doesn't
of
he
those
have a cigar?
type, or a pipe. Oh, no, that wouldn't be very rough. Anyway, but, you know, I think he's one of those kinds of filmmakers. And so my sort of equation is approach equals outcome. You know,
Yeah.
if you're going for something that's going to blow people's minds and change things, you might just achieve it. If you're just trying to tell the story, then you know you got a different kind of preoccupation there.
But here's
That's just a guess, though.
I'm
just
gonna
spitballing.
say it's. I think the story kind of dictates the approach, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Now
Yeah.
Nolan is certainly attracted to a certain kind of story, but I got to admit, would it have even gotten made? Would have Inception could have been just an interesting episode on an anthology show like The Outer Limits.
Mhm.
But it allowed for a take like Nolan's. Whereas, yeah, if you're going to pick a story, a pretty straightforward, pretty simple, heartfelt, but, you know, straightforward story about a man finding his voice, then this is this. And you decide, no, I want royals. I want the historical aspect. Yeah, you're going to get a perfectly fine film that is destined to be, if not forgotten, relegated to Sunday afternoon. It comes up in your feed and like, yeah, I remember that. I had pleasant memories of that. I will watch it again and continue those pleasant memories. Like I don't, does it ever get forgotten? Probably not, but it gets to the bottom of that graph. Like it's like barely perceptible against some of these other more monumental films.
Yeah.
What about, that was my only question, because I think there are other things that can make a movie stick around in our minds. Like, I mean, I was coming at it from the art angle, but I'm also wondering if it's, you know, I had mentioned, did it come out in a good crop? Although even the statistics don't seem to, like, 185 nominations, that's a lot. On Wikipedia, Jim, like, not, it has, okay, so here's the, Jim, here's the page. This is the Wikipedia page, right? For the King's Speech. Nice and long and goes on and on and on. And of course, the constant historical accuracy stuff. And then reception, blah, 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 critical response. And then, oh, wait, list of accolades received by the King's Speech. That is a whole other article.
Oh, yeah.
And that one goes on and on and on and on and on and
Oh.
on and on and on and oh wait, we're halfway. On and on
As
and on and
Stephen
oh.
Colbert once pointed out, the entry for in Wikipedia for the lightsaber is longer than that of the Gutenberg Bible. So
Well,
I mean,
I you know what I I I take umbrage at that, sir. Um, I'm not comparing it to the Gutenberg Bible. I'm saying that this big
Hmm.
piece of pop culture thing in the last 20 years
Yeah.
has its own page of accolades. So
Hmm.
it's not like it came out, it just got buried amongst all the other quality pictures. One of the things was said at the time, because that was right when they had introduced second best, like multi-rank voting.
Hmm.
You know, they had
Okay.
10 nominations, so you could pick your second best. So if you're
Ah.
first best, and so a lot of people were commenting on the day at the time. It's like,
Oh.
well, it's a good movie, but is it the best?
Hmm.
And the punditry at the time was saying, well, second rank voting, like the second best was getting it. It was the I really like Fincher and The Social Network. I like Inception. I
Hmm.
like the Black Swan. And these were really big, arty swings. They
Yeah.
were, these Aronofsky et al. Like, I mean, big, arty, that peak of art and commerce kind of filmmaking, taking big, arty swings with big names. Like,
Yeah.
no one was going, Natalie Portman, who's that?
Well, yeah.
So the argument was that this one, because everyone's like, I am really passionate about Inception, but yeah, that King's Speech is fine, or I really like this or that.
Hmm.
And what may be a great thing to look at in electoral politics to discourage extremes may not be the best for, who gets the best picture. But, and I actually don't agree with that, because it's not like everybody did it, and it had a crap ton of nominations. I think it won honestly. It wasn't just, I think
Goof.
it wasn't just a goof. It won
Hmm.
honestly.
Yeah.
People just really liked the movie.
Well, take a
And
look at its
then,
box office too. It was made for 15 million. It made $430 million.
exactly.
It punched a big hole in the box office that year. Like this little movie about a couple guys that get together in a basement to practice speechifying
Yeah,
made
this wasn't,
30 times its budget.
yeah, this
And a lot
wasn't,
of that went to Firth, and Rush was a
yeah,
producer too,
yeah.
Jeffrey Rush.
Yeah, this wasn't the little indie
Mhm.
that could by
No.
some nobodies a la Coda,
Mhm.
which had to, make do on a location shoot and no, this is big time filmmaking
Mhm.
and made big time money because it's a great
Huge.
crowd pleaser,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
and it came out of the gate super strong. Like if you read the breakdowns and stuff, people were amazed. It was the top movie in England for a month, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing, almost a month. And it had similar splash elsewhere too. So that don't don't mistake the fact that box office sometimes works into people's decisions as well,
Yeah.
especially with the Academy. So
Well, and again, I'm actually saying that regardless what the Academy did or didn't do, this thing was popular in its year.
yeah, oh
It
yeah.
was popular and lauded. It had both
Mhm.
critical and popular praise at the same time. Um, so I don't it was just the second best is not, I think, what was going on there. I think it was like, no, a lot of people actually just really liked the movie.
Yeah.
Which then circles back to my original question. I think we've kind of forgotten about it. And I'm not 100% sure we've really talked about or we've really answered the question. We've proposed some answers
Mhm.
on why it was forgotten, why it's been, relatively speaking, forgotten. We're certainly not, I wouldn't say it was quality. It's not an artistically exciting film, but it's really well made,
Yeah, yeah.
really well told story. Like, I mean,
Well
it's just,
filmed, nicely shot.
yeah,
You know, they do a lot of low
everything
angle
worked.
stuff, and yeah.
Everything worked. It was all like, it's a well-made movie. It's a
Mhm.
well-told story. The characters feel well drawn. You
Mhm.
know, they all feel real. So it's not quality. I don't think it was just the middle of the road and its fame was fleeting. Its fame was out of step with the content. It was genuinely respected and loved. You don't get that many, you don't end up on that many lists. And like you say, punch that big, or like hit that big a hit,
Yeah.
knock it that far out of the park because there's nothing else to watch.
Yeah.
Inception was too weird, you know,
Mhm.
because even the others, it's competition, Social Network. I'm talking on the big, these are important films.
Yeah.
They weren't inaccessible,
Mhm.
you know. Um,
To that end, actually, I was sort of thinking, and I wrote it down not as one of my top three reasons, but the Tom Hooper is no slouch, but since then he hasn't really. He did The Danish Girl, he did Les Miserables, um,
Cats.
but Cats, yeah, and he's not been particularly active. So those other ones we talk about
He got
in
beat
terms
up
of
after
Fincher,
Cats.
it's a Fincher movie.
Yeah.
It's an Aronofsky movie. It's a Nolan
Nolan.
movie.
Yeah.
We would never say something. So in this age of the celebrity director, almost we don't say, oh, that's a Hooper movie, I should
No.
probably watch that. That may be a smaller factor, but I think that's part of it, as well as that maybe his name doesn't have the cachet. If somebody
No,
says
that's
I'm in the mood for besides Shutter Island, which is not my favorite, I'm in the mood for Scorsese tonight, you know exactly what they're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And there's several good
That's
choices
an
there.
interesting point there.
Mm.
I think we gotta kind of put an end to the why it got forgotten, and let me change it around a bit, Jim.
Sure.
Does this deserve re-examination, re-evaluation? Have we missed something? You've just watched it.
Yeah.
You liked it better than you thought you would, than you thought you remembered. Do you think that this film deserves re-examination, deserves, in a way, another assessment?
In terms of it's what it did at the Oscars, do you mean, or
No,
just in general?
Everything, all I've ever said is, who fucking cares what happens?
Yeah.
Sorry. Who
Oh,
cares about what happens at the Oscars? Yeah. That is my whole thrust, is that the Oscars means nothing. Mm-hmm. It is a great way to start a conversation, but we should never end it on, and that's why blah, 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 X, the Oscars was wrong or it was right or whatever. What I'm asking is that we have forgotten this film. We agree on that. Is this film that maybe we should look at again? And this is, I mean, the film scene,
in
film
general,
tube, film critics, the film studies types. Should we be taking another look at this and reassessing this movie? Saying, hey, this is a better movie than time has judged it.
That's a good question. I don't know. That's interesting. Another thing about this movie being made 15 years ago or 14 years ago, when I was watching it last night, I was thinking, boy, this is a white movie. That's another way in which it's aged with the new sort of efforts in casting.
Yeah.
Specifically in the UK. I don't think
Yeah.
there's a single person of color in this, and that
Not a one.
yeah, and that like not a background actor, not a gardener, not a cop, not a person on the streets, and
Which is
and
certainly in keeping with the casual and deep-seated racism of the time.
and they're not even that nice to Australians, which are part of the fold. I mean, they just live in another, and they're pretty nasty to Lionel Logue. So.
Yeah.
So that's one way in which it might not hold up, and you can. I think that's another for another time. But that's an interesting commentary in the past 15 years of casting initiatives of the UK, which I know not everyone agrees with, but it made me notice it.
Yeah.
Last night. So, does it deserve?
Yeah, especially when you think about something like Bridgerton.
Yes.
Although I gotta admit, this movie has more social commentary, more acknowledgement of what's going on than Bridgerton does. Being colorblind in your casting when you're still, let's be honest, still masturbating over wealth and privilege and status.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
off.
Yeah.
Just
I can't.
off.
I keep on watching
But
Downton Abbey.
look, we gave you African casting. It's like,
yeah.
Are there still nobility? Well, then, you take your BIPOC casting, which is just like a color. It's another way of washing a film of its deeply dark soul, which is, hey, these people should live like that so that we can admire from afar.
My wife watches Downton Abbey when she gets home from work, and I keep on hoping against all hope that I stumble upon the lost episode, the German bomber, and where there's an unfortunate crash of a plane right on top of a particular household.
Yeah. But you look at the people who made that, like they are more. What's his name? He's a Tory peer, Julian Fellows, and also why we shouldn't beat up on the writer. You look at Gosford Park, which Fellows wrote. It does not have a Julian Fellows politics. It's got, oh my goodness, what is his name?
Altman?
Thank you. It's got Altman's politics, Altman's class critique, Anyway, sorry. I went off topic there. Went on a bit of a rant.
Your tangent cut off my tangent.
And DMG is saying, so you're saying the King's Speech is about as memorable as the Old Guard? No, I'm not actually.
He's openly chiding you. I should say the ticket taker. I didn't point this out to Rob. Sometimes the ticket takers at the movie house, they have their name and their like favorite movie or the movie they most identify with. And the other day when we went to see the Civil War, it was a young lady with her name. I won't expose her name. Her favorite movie, it was the Old Guard underneath her name, and I was like, should I point this out to Rob? And yeah,
you know what? She's a young woman. She gets to have a favorite. How many movies could she have possibly seen? She gets to have the Old Guard as her favorite.
In a way, I thought it would
double
lead
her age, and it still is. And I'm like, you have no taste.
I was worried it would turn into Apu lecturing Principal Skinner on his novel that he was working on, and then they show the clock go around, and another thing.
Never on a young person who's
I'm just kidding.
Putting out there, and it is. It's my taste was terrible when I was 19 as well. Just because I liked This Is Spinal Tap doesn't mean my taste was that great.
Yeah.
I also watched a lot of terrible teen comedies and thought they were like comedy gold.
Moi aussi.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the question here.
Sure.
Is this movie ripe for re-examining, ripe for a reassessment, a critical reassessment?
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that it got the plaudits that it got what it got. That's good enough. I mean,
Yeah.
it was recognized. It wasn't like it was, thrown on the scrap
And
heap.
all
But it's
those
just,
many dozens of
yeah,
millions,
yeah,
two
yeah.
dozen
And
dozen
there's always,
millions,
there's always other
three
movies.
dozen millions.
There's always other movies to look at. There's movies that, the more obscure movies that I watch that I'm impressed by, the more I realize that there's so many untapped. There's so many movies that have suffered worse fates than being kind of forgotten in the
Yeah.
fray. That sure, you can re-examine it, but boy, there's movies I've not even heard of that would probably change my world if I specifically from other countries. And that's one thing that I'd like to change a bit. So yeah, that's a very big question to ask. But yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for you exactly.
I think you have answered it. You've answered it very well. I agree with you completely. Especially even more so after this conversation, I'd say no, when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, this really is pleasant. It is well made.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's one of the reasons it has not suffered. Let me put it this way. I do not think it has suffered some terrible unjust fate.
Mhm.
Whereas I would agree with you. There's still like, speaking of, little talk about punching down, picking on like, why did I beat that up? Only the worst of the worst bags on the internet would go, Coda, that's a movie that deserves shaming. It's
Yeah.
like, what kind of evil fucking bastard are you? So yeah, I don't think this is received a fate it did not deserve. It had its moment in the sun, and because of a number of things we talked about, it's dropping behind the horizon. It's not tall enough. Every movie gets forgotten eventually, no matter how good it is. Even Star Wars will be forgotten about, except in some film studies class. Like, the art form's changing. The art form, I think, will eventually kind of crystallize like theater has, like classical music. Everything has its time, and then it sort of crystallizes and it becomes a bauble for rich people. And the popular art form will be different, and it'll do its own thing. And all these other things will be, well, I read about that in art history class, but I really prefer blah, blah, blah video game or whatever that next thing is.
Yeah.
So I guess this kind of answer, I will answer this question first before we get into final thoughts. When I think about this film in 2030, I think we'll give it even less. That is my solid prediction. That graph that I showed, where is it? Yeah. This will
It would end in question marks.
this graph here, that will only get worse. I suspect, but there'll be something else that has taken it over in the next few years. Inception will not disappear, but sorry, Jim, not disappear, but it'll be a little smaller. Won't be quite the big thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, 7 years from now, 2030, 20 years after it came out, the only reason it'll have any attention is because who was the producer? What was the studio? Let me find out, Mr. Jaboyko. Who owns the rights now?
Yeah. Well,
Momentum Pictures.
Momentum. Paramount.
Paramount. So Paramount will want to sell something to us on its 20th anniversary. So there you go. Or maybe a royal will do something that isn't terrible. Or maybe a royal will do something so terrible that somebody will go, you should watch this movie to feel slightly better about them.
I on sort of a note, I think
Tell us that note, Jim.
One of the great pleasures of watching movies, especially when you're younger and you sort of don't know the movies that were made before you were born, is that when you stumble on a movie that you maybe haven't heard that much about, that you may be curious about, or there might be a person in it that you're trying to watch all their filmography. There's a pleasure to stumbling on kind of a forgotten classic. I would, not that this is a classic, but a forgotten award winner. And so I think people who are interested in film, part of the pleasure of watching films is stumbling on something you didn't know how good it was. And so that this'll I'm just thinking back to myself when I would watch The Late Show and be like, oh, I remember once I turned on a movie, turned out to be Sleuth. I thought, why are there only two guys in this? It's like Michael Caine and I think it was Laurence Olivier. And it was like the best thing that I'd ever seen at the time. I was probably about 13. I was like, holy cow, this is awesome. And they were wearing disguises and things like that. I knew nothing about it. And, stayed up till 3 a.m. Watching it. But, there are surprises in store in the future for young film fans.
Yeah. Got a couple of comments before we get into final comments. DMG, this reminded me of something I found in my research getting ready for the show, Jim. DMG says, the generations have just passed. The King's Speech took so long to make because Queen Elizabeth didn't want the film made while her mom was still alive. And since the Queen herself had passed a few years ago, there's a certain turning of the page that I think has changed with her son now in charge. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I don't. Hey, they didn't wait. They made the Queen, not too long after Princess Di died.
Yeah.
And so I would doubt that, even if that is somebody saying, oh, well, the palace was enabled. The palace does not have that kind of pull to make sure this movie doesn't get made. Especially as there had been some documentaries that had come out before, it talking about her uncle's, Nazi past. Well,
yeah.
Really should have censored that. Her past. Interestingly enough, though, they did send a couple copies to the palace. Apparently, she did enjoy it. And Seidler, the guy who wrote it, said, well, couldn't ask for a better praise than the Queen herself thinking it was good and heartwarmed by this lovely positive view of her father. To which I would argue it goes right to the heart of, this is not a movie that's saying much. It does not, it is rocking no boats. By the time it came out, no one was saying, oh, stammerer, therefore X, Y, or Z. It needed 6 years for Trump to start making fun of people, with any kind of challenge in their life. But no one other than a truly despicable piece of shit would make fun of a stammerer.
Mm-hmm.
Ibid.
Yeah.
As has been demonstrated by a certain president of once and perhaps future president of the United States of America. And I would say that, going back to more about Jim's comments about how relevant are they at all? Will we actually see more hagiographic biopics of royals as the actual royals become less relevant, as they become more of the soap opera they've always been? Will we start to see more, there was a time when royals stood for something? Because I would argue that was what the Queen was. But anyway, Jim, let's talk about final thoughts. Not gonna lie to you, my friend, that is one of my favorite voice effects.
Yeah, no, I'm just taking a look at my notes here. But Yeah, I think we covered most of the things that I that went through my mind as I was watching this. Again, it's interesting the sort of the what they do to make the character sympathetic is they have Lionel say, "No, we're first name basis. We're all equals here." Like he sort of tries to constantly get under his skin, which is a great approach
Yep.
for this to bring a king down to our level,
Yep.
which I think is
Which is
one of the
super
things that
important.
yeah, which works for it.
Although has been
You
done
don't see him.
before.
Yeah.
The Prince and the Pauper,
Mhm.
that is kind of a storytelling
Yeah.
trope. The royal that breaks
But there,
bread with the peasantry briefly.
there's no choir music, no low angles, him coming out with the ermine, furs or anything like that. I mean, he's got different levels of dress
This
and
is
all that
not
kind of thing.
the king. It's not
Yeah,
Henry
no.
V.
No. There's several interesting approaches that they do take. Whether they're based on how it actually went down is another thing. But yeah, they and the other thing too is that they didn't make these characters really all that sympathetic. I mean, Edward is a total narcissist, and even George the Sixth, our hero here, he's kind of has the
You
potential to
mean
be nasty and
Bertie?
lash out. What? Bertie,
Bertie?
yeah, yeah, he has the potential to lash out at probably his only friend in the world, even though Lionel's hired. But anyway, um, so there's that. I think there's a couple interesting choices that are made here, but again, just the sort of the all white cast really kind of I really noticed that this time, but still like a good final thought. I introduced myself rather to Colin Firth. He did a Pinter play with Donald Pleasance, Colin Friels, and Colin Firth in 1991 at the Comedy Theatre in London. So I might not be totally objective here, but I went. My primary goal was to meet somebody from The Great Escape, i.e., Donald Pleasance.
Yes.
The guy that escaped with Jim Garner in the plane and he went blind. So that was my
The
number
Forger.
one. Yes, yeah. And Colin Firth came out first, and I just said hi, I'm from Canada. I just but I had nowhere else to go, so I just waited at the back door. I just said, "Yeah, I'm from Canada. I'm a drama student. Yeah, really nice to meet you. I've totally enjoyed the play." And he's like, "Thank you very much." And then he sort of took off. And then I eventually did meet Donald Pleasance. But yeah, so that's a neat little grace note. So,
all right. Well, on that note, everybody, thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for especially a great shout out to our good friend on the podcast, Mr. Dragon Movie Guy. Go check out his channel at Dragon Movie Guy. And so, yeah, there'll be, please like, subscribe, ring the bell. And over here, there'll be something YouTube thinks you should watch. Please watch it. It makes Jim and I look good.